Okay, so in this type of exercises, I'm given two functions in a discrete way, and these functions relate a set domain and a set range for each of these functions. Then I'm being asked to find the domain and the range of certain composition, in this case G composed with F. First things first, we have to identify which one is the input function. In this case, my f of x function is the input. Thus, G is gonna be the output function. Now, to identify the values in the domain, what we have to see is that the values in the domain of the input function make all the way to the range of the output function. Let's see how that works. First things first. 4 is the first value in the domain of f. F of 4 is 9. Is 9 in the domain of G? Yes, it is. So we can associate a value in the range of f with a value in the domain of G. And G of 9 is 4. Then that means that 4 is a value in the composition, is a value in the domain of the composition, because it's a value that can go from the domain of the input function all the way to the range of the output function. Next value, 5. F of 5 is 2. Is 2 in the domain of G function? No, it isn't. So it can be part of the domain of the composition. Next, 6. F of 6 is 7. Is 7 in the domain of G? Yes, it is. And G of 7 is 4. Next, F of 8 goes to 7, and we know that 7 is in the domain of G, and G of 7 is 4. Then 6 and 8 are also part of the domain of the composition. Lastly, 9. F of 9 is 2, but 2 is not in the domain of the output function, so it cannot be in the domain of the composition function. So these are the only values in the domain of the composition, that is, the values that go from the domain of the input function all the way into the values of the output function. Lastly, the range of a composition are or is the values where my paths landed in the range of the output function. In this case, G is my output function, and the values where my path landed is just 4. So 4 is the range of the composition. Another example. In this case, I'm being asked to find G composed with F. So here we can see that F is the input function and G is the output function. So what do we have to do? First, the first value in the domain of F is 2. F of 2 is 1. Is 1 in the domain of G? Yes, it is. And G of 1 is 1. So 2 is going to be in the domain of the composition. Next, 6. F of 6 is 6, but 6 is not in the domain of G, so that value cannot be in the domain of the composition. Next, 8. F of 8 is 5. And G and 5 is in the domain of G, and G of 5 is 9. So 8 is in the domain of the composition. Lastly, 9. F of 9 is 3, and 3 is in the domain of G, and G of 3 is 1. So 9 is in the domain of the composition. Lastly, remember, the range are the values where we landed in the range of the output function. In this case, we landed on 1 and 9. So those are the values in the range of my composition.